The taping was supposed to be a standard segment, a polite conversation between Hollywood veterans who had both earned their place in American pop culture lore. But what unfolded between Denzel Washington and Whoopi Goldberg on that afternoon broadcast of The View would become something far bigger than a talk show clash. It would spark one of the most viral debates of the year, a cultural rift between audiences who saw it as a reckoning and others who saw it as an ambush. Because what started as a light discussion about generational shifts in Hollywood quickly took a turn when Whoopi, with her usual candid charm, made a passing remark implying that Denzel's recent advocacy speeches, while eloquent, were overly idealistic and disconnected from the systemic issues many Americans face daily. She punctuated it by saying, "You can talk calm all day, Denzel, but calm doesn't pay rent." And while the audience chuckled at the line, Denzel didn't even blink. He turned slightly toward her with the kind of poise that makes silence feel louder than shouting and responded with a sentence that instantly rewrote the entire tone of the room. "If you need anger to feel heard, maybe you've forgotten how to listen." And the studio fell into that stunned, electric silence that only happens when a truth cuts deeper than anyone expected. Joy Behar sat back visibly surprised. Sunny Hostin blinked rapidly as though unsure whether to jump in or let it play. But Whoopi's face told the story caught somewhere between disbelief, hurt, and the dawning realization that she had underestimated the precision of Denzel's intellect and delivery. And for a few long seconds she didn't reply, the silence stretching like fabric pulled tight over glass, while the live audience began shifting in their seats, some looking away, others watching like the next word might shatter something delicate. And Denzel didn't gloat or grin or follow up with another zinger. He simply let the words hang. And that restraint made it land even harder, because it wasn't just a personal burn, it was a surgical call-out of a broader cultural pattern, the replacement of discussion with outburst, of depth with volume. And while the production cut to commercial just moments after to avoid further derailment, it was too late. Clips were already being uploaded, hashtags were already forming, and by the time the show returned from break, the internet had exploded with reactions. The quote was everywhere, dissected by political commentators, lifestyle influencers, and even university professors weighing in on what it meant to truly listen versus simply waiting to respond. And Whoopi tried to reset the tone by joking her way back into control, saying something about Denzel always being too cool for his own good. But it landed flat. The audience wasn't laughing anymore, and the energy of the table had shifted into something taut and unreconciled. And after the show, while most of the co-hosts filed out with polite nods, Denzel and Whoopi reportedly had a quiet conversation backstage. No cameras, no producers, just two veterans of the spotlight who had momentarily collided under it. And while neither shared details of that exchange, their body language in separate, public appearances over the following weeks told vastly different stories. Denzel walked with his usual composed gravity, praised by many for offering a rare glimpse of masculine composure and verbal precision under pressure, while Whoopi, though still respected, found herself facing a flurry of think pieces questioning whether she had begun to mistake her platform for infallibility. And as the moment calcified into a meme, a soundbite, a quote etched onto everything from mugs to t-shirts, Denzel remained characteristically silent about the aftermath, letting others project their interpretations while he moved on with work and advocacy. But the impact lingered, and among media scholars and commentators, that single sentence was heralded as a modern example of rhetorical mastery, where one line delivered not with rage, but with calm stripped away pretense, and exposed a truth few had been bold enough to name on daytime TV, that sometimes the loudest voice in the room is just trying to cover the echo of its own insecurity. And the ripple effects were massive, not just in ratings or online metrics, but in actual cultural reflection. Panel shows began shifting slightly, leaning less into the predictable fireworks and more into introspective exchanges. The public began demanding less spectacle and more sincerity, and somewhere beneath the noise of retweets and dueling YouTube takes, people were reminded that dignity and impact didn't require shouting, they required clarity, courage, and the willingness to let silence speak when it needed to. And though Whoopi would go on to recover in reputation and popularity, even subtly referencing the incident in later interviews, with a smirk and a shrug, the moment itself became a quiet watermark in television history, a signal that even in a space built for opinion, there were still rare flashes of transcendent truth. And this one belonged to Denzel. In the weeks that followed the seismic episode of The View, The media frenzy refused to quiet down, and while Denzel Washington went about his life with the same grounded grace, he had always embodied speaking at youth events, filming his latest project, and remaining entirely silent about the now iconic quote. Whoopi Goldberg found herself navigating unfamiliar territory, not because she hadn't faced criticism before, but because this moment was different, because this time, the challenge hadn't come from a politician, an online mob, or a temporary cultural storm. It had come from someone she had respected for decades, someone who had spent a lifetime avoiding controversy, and instead commanded it in a single sentence. And what made it worse was that no one could call it a rant, no one could reduce it to an attack or a gaffe, because the line had been delivered with the precision of someone who knew the power of words, and used them sparingly, like a scalpel. And in private, producers whispered that Whoopi was unusually quiet during pre-show meetings, that her signature swagger had softened into something more reserved, contemplative, even tense. And though she never admitted publicly that Denzel's words had stung, close friends confided to journalists that she rewatched the clip more than once, not to revel in defiance, but to understand where she had miscalculated, where her instinct to punctuate the moment with a laugh had instead exposed her to a silence louder than applause. And Denzel, for his part, kept walking forward, but not unscathed, because while he had delivered the line with surgical calm, he was not immune to the firestorm that followed. Social media was split. Countless op-eds accused him of shaming a black woman in front of a national audience. Others praised him for defending dignity without aggression, and even prominent cultural commentators were divided between those who saw it as a clash of generational philosophies and those who interpreted it as a deep fracture in public discourse where truth and ego were now indistinguishable. And all the while, neither Denzel nor Whoopi fueled the fire, but it burned anyway. It burned in podcast debates and classroom discussions. It burned in memes and viral tweets. It burned because people were tired of shouting and yet addicted to it. And for the first time in a long while, two icons had shown what it looked like when silence, not outrage, dominated the conversation. And it wasn't long before media outlets began reporting that Denzel had declined several high-profile interview requests from CNN, NPR, even 60 Minutes, and instead accepted an invitation from Howard University to speak to their graduating class. And when he took the stage on commencement day, dressed in his signature understated suit, the crowd erupted before he had spoken a single word. And in his speech, there was no mention of Whoopi, no reference to the incident, only a deep meditation on integrity, on listening, on how the world confuses volume with value. And at one point he paused, scanned the sea of young faces, and said, "Be careful not to become what you're shouting at." And the audience roared, because they knew exactly what he meant.